The male ego is often misunderstood. It's not just about pride or arrogance. It's a delicate structure built on the need to feel seen, needed, and in control. But here's the truth. Most women overlook the ego as not love. It's control. And when you stop feeding it, when you stop playing into it, something powerful happens. He begins to see you differently. You become less of an emotional servant and more of a spiritual force he can't explain or ignore. Men with fragile egos often enter relationships with unspoken expectations. They expect admiration without offering appreciation. They crave loyalty without offering honesty. They want submission without earning trust. And when a woman doesn't fall in line, when she doesn't stroke his ego every time he does the bare minimum, he feels threatened. Not because she's wrong, but because she's no longer giving him the control he mistook for love. You see, the ego feeds on attention, obedience, and validation. It wants you to respond when he pulls away. It wants you to apologize just to keep the peace. It wants you to stay quiet so he can feel loud. But when you stop doing that, when you stop allowing his behavior to dictate your value, that ego starts to starve. And when a man's ego starts to starve, it panics. He doesn't obsess because you hurt him. He obsesses because you revealed a truth about him that he's been avoiding his whole life, that without control, he doesn't know how to love. This is not about manipulation. This is about choosing a higher standard for yourself. When you stop being available every time he disappears, he feels it. When you stop trying to fix his mood or chase his attention, he notices. And when you stop performing for his approval, he's forced to sit with the uncomfortable silence that your absence creates. That's when the shift begins. Not because you played a game, but because you stopped playing yours. Some women think loving a man means saving him from his ego. That's not your job. It's not your duty to shrink yourself so he can feel big. Real love doesn't require that you lose your voice. It doesn't demand that you forget your needs. In fact, real love cannot exist where ego is being constantly fed. Ego cannot sit in the same room as accountability. Ego cannot grow where truth lives. And when you choose truth over comfort, when you say, I will not dance to this anymore, you don't destroy him, you disrupt him. And that disruption is what makes him obsess. Not because he's angry, but because you've become something his ego cannot touch. A woman with her own center. A woman who is rooted, calm, and not afraid to walk away. That's the kind of woman who lingers in his mind. That's the kind of woman who breaks the cycle. That's the kind of woman he'll either rise for or lose. So no, you don't need to yell. You don't need to play games. You don't need to act like you don't care. You simply need to stop feeding the lie that his ego is your responsibility. The moment you do that, he won't be able to stop thinking about you, not because you gave him what he wanted, but because you gave yourself what you deserved. Let the healing begin. There's a difference between wanting love and needing love. And the moment you begin to chase someone, especially a man who's driven more by ego than emotion, you start handing over your power piece by piece. A woman who chases approval, attention, or affection becomes small in the eyes of someone who only values what they have to work for. The real secret isn't in getting a man to choose you. It's in choosing yourself so boldly, so fully, that the right man is drawn to your light, not your effort. When you refuse to chase, You shift the energy, you change the entire dynamic of the connection. Because men, especially those operating from ego, aren't obsessed with women who pour endlessly into them. They're obsessed with the ones who pour into themselves, the ones who don't call twice, the ones who don't explain what they deserve, the ones who walk when they aren't being honored. That energy, it's rare, it's unforgettable. Because it's not needy, it's sacred. You've been taught that if you love hard enough, stay long enough, and prove yourself deeply enough, he'll change. But that's not love. That's emotional labor disguised as loyalty. And when a man doesn't meet you with the same depth, the same energy, the same intentional effort, you owe it to yourself to stop showing up. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Chasing someone who won't meet you halfway isn't love. It's abandonment of self. When a man sees that you no longer center him in your world, he begins to feel the weight of your absence. It's not that he misses what you did for him. He misses the feeling of being needed, being validated, being above your own desires. And when you take that back, when you reclaim your energy and redirect it toward your own healing, growth, and joy, you become the kind of woman who haunts his mind. Not because you were available, but because you were whole without him. Choosing yourself isn't about revenge. It's about remembrance. Remembering who you were before you thought love had to be earned. Remembering that your softness is valuable, not disposable. Remembering that your presence is a privilege, not a given. When you choose yourself, you become unavailable to anything that costs your peace. And that's when things begin to shift, not just in him, but in you. Suddenly, you start not texting first. You start not waiting for the bare minimum. You see, not asking someone to see your worth. You see it yourself. You sit with yourself. You pour into yourself. And in doing so, you become irresistible, not just to him, but to anyone who has the eyes to see your value. That energy cannot be faked. It's not about posting quotes or pretending you've moved on. It's in your silence. It's in your standards. It's in your boundaries. A woman who refuses to chase doesn't become cold. She becomes clear, and that clarity is what shifts the power. So stop giving chances to someone who's only giving confusion. Stop believing that your love can heal someone who doesn't even know they're bleeding. And stop telling yourself that loyalty means losing yourself in someone else's potential. You were not born to chase. You were born to choose. And the moment you choose yourself, without apology, without hesitation, without fear, you create a space so powerful, only the right man will dare to enter it. Let the healing begin. Most people confuse boundaries with ultimatums. They think standing up for yourself is about controlling others or threatening to leave if they don't act right. But boundaries are not about changing someone else. They're about honoring yourself. They're about saying, this is what I accept. This is what I allow. This is where I stop. And when a woman begins to set boundaries instead of begging for change, it doesn't just protect her, it disrupts a man's ego in the most powerful way. You see, an ultimatum comes from fear. It sounds like, if you don't do this, I'm gone. It's a threat rooted in insecurity, hoping to provoke guilt or force action. But a boundary is different. A boundary is love wrapped in self-respect. It doesn't scream, it doesn't shake, it doesn't beg. It simply says, I will not betray myself to keep this connection alive. That kind of energy doesn't ask for validation. It demands alignment. Men who operate from ego expect a woman to be flexible, to bend, to compromise, even when it costs her peace. And for a long time, many women do exactly that. They make excuses, they lower their expectations, they try to understand bad behavior in the name of love, but eventually something shifts. There comes a moment when the discomfort of being disrespected becomes louder than the fear of being alone. That moment, that's when the boundary is born. When a woman says no more and means it not with anger, but with clarity, it does something to a man, especially a man who's used to getting his way. He realizes that the old tactics, disappearing, gaslighting, manipulating, don't work on her anymore. He can't control what she tolerates, and that scares him more than any argument ever could, because he knows when a woman sets a boundary, she's already imagined her life without him, and she's made peace with it. Boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection. They're how you love yourself out loud. And the man who's meant for you won't be offended by your standards. He'll rise to meet them. But the one who's only interested in ego strokes will either retreat or rebel. He'll call you difficult too much or cold. He'll say you've changed, and he'll be right. You have changed. You've stopped choosing his comfort over your clarity. You've stopped betraying yourself just to keep the peace. That kind of change doesn't just hurt the ego, it shatters it. Setting a boundary might cost you a relationship, but it will never cost you your soul. Because a relationship that requires you to ignore your needs, your feelings, or your truth isn't a relationship, it's a performance. And you weren't born to perform. You were born to live fully, speak honestly, and love deeply, but not at your own expense. So when you say, I will not tolerate dishonesty, or I won't stay where I'm not respected, you're not asking for too much, you're asking for what's real, and real love honors that. Real love respects that. Real love doesn't require you to shrink, it invites you to expand. And if a man feels shaken by your boundaries, let him be. Because if he's more attached to your submission than your soul, he was never truly for you. But if your strength inspires him to evolve, to reflect, to grow, then your boundary didn't just protect you, it elevated him. That's the beauty of standing in your truth. It forces everything around you to either rise up or fall away. Let the healing begin. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Silence has a language, and when spoken from a place of strength, not punishment, it can pierce through ego deeper than any argument ever could. A man whose self-worth is tied to control, attention, or emotional dominance doesn't expect silence. He expects you to plead, to prove, to panic. He expects a reaction because, for him, your emotional outbursts reaffirm his importance. But when you stop reacting, when you become still, he's forced to meet the very thing he spent his life avoiding himself. We're conditioned to believe that silence means weakness or indifference, but in truth, silence is sacred. It is clarity. It is confidence. It says, I no longer argue for my worth. I no longer negotiate my value. When you stop responding to manipulation, inconsistency, or emotional neglect, you're not giving up, you're rising up. And that quiet detachment, it unsettles his ego more than any fight ever could. The ego thrives on chaos. It thrives on drama, tension, and the need to constantly prove who's right and who's wrong. But silence starves it. Silence holds up a mirror that says, I am no longer engaging with dysfunction. If you want access to me, bring peace, not noise. That kind of energy forces a man to ask himself, what happens when she no longer needs me to feel seen? What happens when she chooses her peace over my pride? When you mirror his behavior, not by copying his immaturity, but by stepping back, you give him a taste of emotional accountability. If he pulls away and you chase, he feels powerful. But if he pulls away and you stay grounded, unmoved, unavailable, he becomes confused. He starts to wonder why you're not reacting. And when the ego becomes confused, it becomes curious. That curiosity, it leads to obsession. Because now you've interrupted the pattern. You've taken away the control. This isn't about playing games. This isn't about being cold or distant for the sake of strategy. It's about honoring your emotional space. It's about understanding that silence is sometimes the only language the ego can hear. You've said enough. You've explained enough. You've asked for more and received less. At some point, your silence becomes your boundary. And a man who's grown accustomed to your noise, your explanations, your forgiveness, your pleading, will feel the emptiness your absence creates. When you sit in silence, you begin to hear your own truth more clearly. You begin to feel the parts of you that have been shouting for attention while you were busy fighting for someone else to see you. That stillness brings clarity, and with clarity comes power. Because now you're no longer reacting, you're responding, you're no longer performing, you're observing, and from that place you stop trying to change him. You start changing your own narrative. A woman who responds with silence doesn't lose value, she gains it. She becomes unpredictable, unreadable, unavailable to the games. That's what disrupts the ego. That's what makes a man pause. Because for the first time, he's no longer the center of your emotional world. You've reclaimed that space for yourself, and he doesn't know how to fill the void left behind. And in that silence, he's left to wonder, what does she know now that she didn't know before? What does she feel so strongly about that she doesn't even need to speak? And most importantly, has she finally realized that she deserves more? When silence comes from strength, not fear, it becomes one of the most powerful tools for healing, self-respect, and transformation. Because a woman in silence is not a woman who's lost. She's a woman who's listening to herself for the first time. Let the healing begin. True power comes from within, and that power is born when you stop looking outside yourself for validation and begin to heal your own wounds. Many women believe that their worth depends on the love they receive from a man, especially one whose ego runs the relationship. But when you start to heal your own heart, when you reclaim your emotional sovereignty, you shift the entire dynamic. Suddenly, you are no longer someone to be possessed or controlled. You are someone to be respected, admired, and yes, even obsessed over. Healing is not a destination, it is a process. It requires courage to face the pain that has shaped you, the disappointments that have broken you, and the patterns that have kept you stuck. It requires you to sit with your own discomfort without running away or seeking external fixes. This is where true emotional power is forged. When you learn to nurture your own soul, to listen deeply to your own needs, and to honor your own boundaries, you become a woman who radiates strength from a place of wholeness, not desperation. A man who is driven by ego thrives on insecurity, both his own and yours. When you are hungry for his approval, he holds the power because you make your peace dependent on his presence or absence. But a healed woman is unpredictable to him because she no longer reacts from a place of lack. She responds from a place of abundance. This shift confuses the ego because it can no longer manipulate what is no longer vulnerable. Instead of seeing you as someone to dominate or control, he begins to see you as a force that challenges him to grow or lose you entirely. Healing yourself isn't about erasing the past or pretending that the hurt never happened. It's about integrating those experiences so that they no longer define your worth or your choices. It's about forgiving, not to free him, but to free yourself. Forgiveness is a gift you give your soul so it can stop carrying the weight of resentment and pain. When you carry less baggage, you move with more grace, clarity, and purpose. And that movement is magnetic. The moment you stop needing love to feel whole, you reclaim your emotional freedom. You are no longer tied to the outcome of a relationship or the approval of a man. This freedom scares the ego because it means you are no longer a prize to be won, but a queen who rules her own kingdom. And kings respect queens. They don't try to break them down or diminish their power. Healing is messy and nonlinear, but it is worth every tear, every moment of solitude, every painful reflection. Because on the other side of that work is a woman who stands tall, not because she has never been hurt, but because she has learned how to rise anyway. She knows that her value is intrinsic and unshakable. She knows that love is not about possession, but about partnership. And she knows that her peace is her power. So when you heal, you stop chasing illusions. You stop settling for less than you deserve. You stop allowing your peace to be disturbed by ego-driven chaos. Instead, you become a beacon of calm, confidence, and unwavering self-love. And that is the secret to becoming truly irresistible, not because you changed to fit someone else's idea of love, but because you transformed into the highest version of yourself. Let the healing begin. There is a profound difference between reacting emotionally and commanding your emotions with calm strength. Many women find themselves caught in cycles of yelling, crying, explaining, or proving their worth, always hoping that by doing more, by being louder, by showing more vulnerability, they will finally be seen, heard, and valued. But what if the secret to truly hurting a man's ego, the secret to making him obsessed with you, lies not in your reaction, but in your stillness, in your ability to hold space for yourself without surrendering your peace? When a woman reacts with anger or tears, the ego feels fed. It thrives on emotional chaos because chaos means control. When you engage in arguments or explanations, you give the ego something to latch onto, something to defend, and something to feel powerful over. But when you choose stillness, calmness, and silence instead of a fight, you take away its ammunition. You become the eye of the storm, unshaken, unbothered, and untouchable. Emotional command means that you are not ruled by your feelings, but that you allow your feelings to inform you without dictating your behavior. It means you can feel hurt, disappointment, or frustration without letting those feelings control your actions. Instead of yelling to be heard, you speak your truth quietly but firmly. Instead of crying to prove pain, you carry your wounds with dignity. Instead of reacting impulsively, you respond with intentionality. This shift is revolutionary for the ego because it exposes its limitations. The ego's power comes from the reaction it can provoke. Without that reaction, it begins to wither. A man who expects you to implode at his neglect, to fight for scraps of attention, or to crumble under pressure, finds himself facing a woman who simply won't play those games anymore. And that refusal unsettles him deeply. Stillness is not indifference. It is presence. It is the quiet confidence of knowing your worth without demanding validation. When you hold your peace, even in the face of chaos, you are demonstrating a level of emotional mastery that many never reach. This mastery shifts the power dynamic because it says, without words, I am in control of my spirit, and you do not have the power to break it. This calmness invites reflection. It forces a man to look inward and ask himself why his usual tactics no longer work. Why the woman who once begged now simply walks away? Why the one who once cried now stands silent? That kind of introspection can be uncomfortable for an ego built on dominance and control, but it's necessary for growth. By choosing emotional command over reaction, you teach a powerful lesson that your peace is non-negotiable. You are not here to be manipulated, gaslit, or controlled. You are here to love yourself fiercely and demand the same in return. This teaches him that your love is not a commodity to be won through ego games, but a gift reserved for those who honor your soul. When you practice this calm strength, you become an enigma. You become unpredictable, not because you are playing with emotions, but because you have become grounded in your own truth. That groundedness is magnetic. It calls to the part of him that knows there is something greater than ego, something real, vulnerable, and eternal. It awakens a desire not to possess, but to protect, not to control, but to cherish. So the secret is not in fighting fire with fire, but in standing in the stillness of your own flame. The secret is not in proving your worth through noise, but in demonstrating it through peace. When you do this, you don't just hurt his ego, you awaken his soul. And that awakening is what makes him obsessed, not with control, but with connection.